Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Clark in the Center for Weight Loss Success. Tonight on Losing Weight USA, we're going to talk a little more extensively about gluten and specifically wheat. Wheat is the most common source of gluten. Gluten can be a problem for many people, from an inflammatory state to causing severe celiac disease to just call it gluten intolerance. And we talked about that a lot last week. But now we're going to expand on that and really look a little more closely at just wheat and can it affect multiple areas in our body, not just weight. All right, welcome to Losing Weight USA, real-time answers to your weight loss questions, as well as a little bit of expert advice. Gives you direct access not only to me, but you should be receiving the health tips and recipes via the membership portal. Each webinar is going to last about a half hour or so. If you have questions, type them in the chat box as we go. If you think of something once we're all done, just give us a yell here at the Center for Weight Loss Success. The email is success@cfws.com. Phone number 757-873-1880. All right, I'm going to flip these slides. There we go. All right, wheat. Again, most common source of gluten is wheat flour. Okay, so wheat flour, why are you everywhere? Because it really seems that way, doesn't it? All right, a couple little quotes here by physicians that really kind of specialize and have researched wheat and the potential problems with it over the last couple of years. And I'll give you the books that this actually came from. Both of these have very good books, very good resources. If you're curious about this, want more information. Dr. William Davis wrote Wheat Belly. Dr. David Perlmutter wrote Grain Brain. So first, is the world's most popular grain is also the world's most destructive ingredient. Gluten is our generation's tobacco, addicting and potentially causing long-term problems. And there's some real truth to those statements there. All right, so what about wheat? Okay, wheat, can't talk. Been talking all day. The proliferation of wheat products parallels the expansion of our waste. And basically, wheat is one of the grains actually that raises blood sugars the most. So lots of different wheat products out there. Grain obviously is something that's around and it helps feed the world. So it's not like, gee, let's get rid of all grain products. It's like, no, we actually feed the world with this. And it's, most of the world's calories actually come from wheat. Look at the total calories consumed. Most of it actually does come from wheat. But if you look at kind of what actually raises blood sugars the most, is it actually white sugar? Does sugar raise blood sugars the most? How about candy bar, Snickers bar, through as an example? What about some fruits, bananas, or whole wheat bread? Whole wheat bread touted as, hey, this is really healthy. We should be eating a lot of this. What raises blood sugars the most? It's whole wheat bread. Wheat, is the dominant source of gluten, but the wheat itself can actually potentially problems there. And again, wheat constitutes about 20% of all the calories consumed worldwide. That's a tremendous number. If you think about all the calories consumed worldwide, wheat, about 20%. If you think about it, how many aisles in the grocery store are dedicated to wheat or grain products? The bread aisle, obviously, baking aisle, snack aisle, cereal aisle, anything that has pastries. These are all around through the different aisles of the grocery store. So it affects all these kind of things. So wheat is in just about everything. All right, now to go further, then we have to let go of a few myths. Okay, and one of those myths, and I know we kind of talk about this over and over again, is that a myth is that low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet is a good idea. We need to let go of that myth. Also, that cholesterol is bad. Like, no, we die without cholesterol. We need it. Okay, and that cholesterol itself isn't bad. It's some of the inflammatory conditions that go along with it, which often can be caused by the carbohydrates, specifically wheat. All right, so wheat was first cultivated, thousands of years ago. So first known cultivation was kind of 330 BC. So we're talking over 2,000 years ago, right? And it was something called einkorn wheat. Okay? But it was cultivated. Wheat has changed dramatically, though, over the past 50 years. Because over the past 50 years, probably maybe 60 years now, there's been tremendous technology improvements that has allowed some of these different, we can modify wheat. Okay, we can modify a lot of different foods. That's GMO, genetically modified organisms. So it can be modified. So wheat has been hybridized and crossbred to make it resistant to disease and drought. And so that now it can be grown throughout the world. It can feed a lot more people. All this sounds good. And it's all to increase yield. And a yield now is about 10 times of what it used to be 50 years ago. And an acre of wheat can now produce about 10 times what it did 50 years ago. And that's a big, huge change. But the issue there is modern wheat has been so modified that today's strain of wheat actually couldn't survive in the wild anymore. It actually needs all the fertilizers, all the pest controls in order for it to survive. If we just threw it out in the wild, it wouldn't survive well at all. And what has been done to this is that, and it's testing these new strains, but the real question is, are these new strains as safe? They're certainly assumed to be safe. It's like, okay, it's just wheat, right? But when you start genetically modifying things, are there actually problematic sides to that? And unfortunately, that question hasn't been studied well. That doesn't mean there are problematic sides to that. It's just that we don't know. So wheat gluten has undergone significant, wheat and wheat itself, but also the gluten part of the whole has undergone significant structural change with all these hybridization. Does that mean it's more potent? Does that mean it actually causes more problems? We don't actually know because it actually hasn't been studied. It was just all these hybrids of wheat were just assumed to be very healthy and kind of increasing caloric, we can get more calories to the starving people throughout the world. And that's true, but it hasn't been studied well. So a question that often comes up is wheat actually addictive? Okay, we'll often hear, sugar is almost like a drug, but when we're talking about the glucose then, which can often come from wheat, because we know that there are many things that are addictive. Okay, exogenous drugs, alcohol can be addictive, cocaine, tobacco, heroin, lots of different things that can be addictive. Okay, and a lot of these kind of supercharge and they hijack your central nervous system. And by doing that, they make you just want more and more and more. And a little bit is no longer enough. Now I have to have more. And it takes more to actually get that same high. So is there something about wheat that is something along these same lines? So when we look at that carefully, there are things called endogenous opioid-like products, which are basically endorphins. Endorphins are kind of our feel-good little molecules in our body. They're what kind of go way up when we're happy. When you talk about athletes, they get that runner's high. They get into the groove there. And that's the endorphins really kicking in. But there's other exogenous opioid-like peptides that are actually found in wheat. And so in gluten, there are some exorphins that are similar to endorphins and something called gliadorphins. That's from the gliadin product that's in gluten. Okay? And so the question there is, do they actually make you crave another hit? There's somewhat addicting quality of this. Now, again, we don't necessarily know all the answers about this, but it certainly is suspicious because we do hear people describe this all the time. Obviously, wheat and obesity is a very common thing, and that's grain of any time, but it's really carbohydrate of any time. So wheat and carbohydrate tend to increase blood sugars. We talk about this all the time. Okay. Blood sugar swings, which then cause insulin swings. And these increased insulin levels, it's insulin that turns on fat storage, especially visceral fat storage. Visceral fat is around our abdominal area and on the internal abdominal organs. And that's the most dangerous fat, the least healthy fat. Wheat also tends to increase inflammatory markers, though. Inflammation is one of the major causes of many disease problems. Cardiac disease, one of the biggest ones, is that it's probably the inflammatory process that causes some of these problematic cholesterol problems, collections in the blood vessels themselves. And just the increase in inflammatory markers also leads to visceral fat deposition, again, around your belly. It also tends to reduce the production of adiponectin. Adiponectin is actually a protective type of thing. It's a component that's made by your body, but it reduces that, so you lose protection, both from weight as well as from inflammatory conditions. All right, last webinar, we talked about kind of gluten intolerance, okay, and we talked about the intestinal disease. And we mentioned kind of celiac disease is the full-blown major problem. And people that have celiac disease, they get exposed to a little bit of gluten, which generally the biggest where gluten comes from is mainly wheat, but it can be in multiple other things. Okay? So celiac disease is a major problem. We're finding the incidence actually slowly increasing. Okay? And it's what causes the inflammation is these antibodies to the wheat gliadin, which is found in the blood. And these antibodies then cause this inflammatory reaction. And it gets that in the intestinal tract, and subsequently that can truly be all kinds of intestinal problems there. But it also is not, if it's not the full-blown celiac disease of the intestinal tract, it can also cause a lot of other problems. Reflux is one of the biggest ones. So reflux is probably one of the biggest things that grains tend to cause. And it can affect irritable bowel syndrome, but it tends to cause more bloating, more cramping, more gas, constipation, diarrhea, kind of a whole gamut. It tends to make all these types of things somewhat worse. And people often find, gee, if I get rid of that, I feel better. All right, so what about diabetes? We talk about this all the time. Insulin resistance, talk about this all the time. Well, wheat obviously is a carbohydrate. Any plant is a carbohydrate. So wheat can increase blood sugars about the easiest of anything else. Okay, wheat is one of the number one culprits. It'll make blood sugar go up more than anything. You think about eating sugar. It's like, no, actually sugar doesn't increase your blood sugar as much as wheat actually does. Now, diabetes mellitus back in the hunter-gatherer societies basically was non-existent. They didn't see it. Not that it couldn't happen. It's just that because they weren't exposed, they were eating very small amounts of grain. Again, and it was probably a completely different grain product because wheat has been so genetically modified. So what they were eating is not the same thing that we are eating. But it basically wasn't seen. Diabetes mellitus wasn't really seen until the introduction of cultivating wheat and grains. And the wheat consumption now really parallels the increase in diabetes and obesity. The average consumption of wheat now is about 133 pounds a year. And that's on average. Now, some of you probably know people that basically have no wheat. Okay? So that means the rest of us are making up for this. So 133 pounds a year on average. That's a lot of wheat. All right, but what about other things? How about aging? Okay, could this be problematic? Okay, wheat, carbohydrate, fructose. We talked about that probably a few months ago. Fructose, and then we'll hit it again sometime. So, but carbohydrate, fructose, wheat in general, they produce what's something called advanced glycation end products. AGE or age. Okay? What do these things do? They basically worsen inflammatory conditions. So it tends to stiffen arteries. It increases cataracts. It slows neuronal connections, which basically when you have slow neurons throughout your brain, that's what dementia is. We can't think straight, can't remember things. So yes, if we can avoid those things, going wheat-free, low carb, low fructose, it is actually anti-aging then. We can slow that down. Now, there's a way to prove that. Study will never be done. But basically, we know these end products that worsen these problems will decrease by avoiding wheat. Okay, heart disease. The most common killer around. obesity, heart disease. Okay. All right. So we often talk about LDL. People will talk about cholesterol. We just had this, a few months ago, talked about cholesterol. So LDL, or low density lipoproteins, are often referred to as bad cholesterol. Okay. But there's only actually certain particles of those LDL that are actually bad. It's really the smallest LDLs that are actually bad. There are some larger LDLs, and they're not bad at all. But we sometimes basically throw LDL under the bus and we say, okay, LDLs are bad. They're bad cholesterol. Again, it's only certain particles that are actually bad. But diet actually influences this the most. Carbohydrate and wheat will tend to increase the very low density of lipoproteins and triglycerides. Both of these tend to increase the bad LDLs, or these small LDLs. Insulin, then, because of the carbohydrate and wheat, makes insulin levels go up, but insulin all by itself turns on lipogenesis in the liver. That's the fatty liver. Okay? And therefore, it increases the production of these small LDLs, which are the bad ones, as well as triglycerides, which also cause increased heart disease. So yes, they're directly related. So if we can get rid of those or decrease what we take in, can it potentially be helpful? The answer is yes. What about the skin? Okay, now we're getting into some how would wheat actually influence your skin? Well, it goes back to that advanced glycation end products. Basically, aging in your skin is loss of elasticity and thickening. Typically, the older we get, the thinner our skin gets, and we use elasticity in there. That's what wrinkles are. We lose the elasticity. But it can also increase acne. It's, again, inflammatory conditions, blood sugar goes up, insulin levels. They all increase this inflammatory conditions. Acne is one of those. People often think, chocolate causes acne, right? You take kids, but it's really the sugar, not necessarily the chocolate. It's the sugar that can actually do this, what makes insulin levels go up. Again, wheat products do that actually more than the sugar products do. Wheat also tends to cause something called dermatitis herpetiformis, which is basically an inflammatory rash, okay, which causes all kinds of other problems there. But it goes away by avoiding the wheat. But it can also cause mouth ulcers, acanthosis, nigricans, the skin changes on creases. So if you notice that, in different creases on my skin, whether it be the neck and the groin, are common ones, it seems like the skin is darker there. That's acanthosis nigricans. It just means a darkening of the skin. But basically what it's referring to, the reason it occurs is insulin resistance. And so again, increased blood sugars, insulin resistance, but all other things too. Psoriasis, pyoderma gangrenosum, these are skin infections, skin kind of inflammatory conditions, and then finally hair loss. Okay? So all these things can be made worse by wheat products. Well, how about just your brain? I gave you those kind of quotes at the beginning here. I'll give you a couple more quotes. Thomas Edison, okay? The chief function of the body is to carry the brain around. That's very true. Okay? So Dave Perlmutter, he's the one who wrote Brain. Okay? The origin of brain diseases, as in many cases, predominantly dietary. Although several factors play into the genesis and progression of brain disorders, to a large extent, numerous neurological afflictions often reflect the mistake of consuming too many carbohydrates and too few healthy fats. Now, if you just look at the dietary changes from kind of our ancestors 10,000 years ago, okay, ancestors' diet is actually a very low carbohydrate diet. About 5% of the intake was actually carbohydrate. 20% was protein. Actually, most of it was fat. The USDA kind of recommended diet, basically about 60% carbohydrate, 20% protein, and 20% fat. Completely different. Obviously, we haven't done real well over these last 20, 40 years to help ourselves and our health by some of these diets that were recommended. So kind of continuing on the wheat in the brain, almost all degenerative conditions are associated with inflammation. And the biggest instigators of inflammation is going to be carbohydrate often gluten, which then increases cytokines. Cytokines are inflammatory products that are made by the cells. And the assault on the brain is actually much harder to recognize until it's too late. And that's where most of the symptoms from kind of Alzheimer's, they don't show up till they're there. It's like, gee, I was doing fine till there's a problem. And there's not a whole lot we can do about this after the fact. So should we be actually looking at what can prevent this? So the real question there is that what if we're all of us are actually really sensitive to gluten from the perspective of the brain? If that were true, we don't, again, doesn't necessarily cause symptoms till they're there late in life, sometimes earlier in life, that this is a very real possibility. Obviously theoretical, but still, it's something to truly consider there. So we mentioned kind of the exorphins, kind of the endorphins, and those are the feel-good things, and those are temporary, and they actually they go up after eating grains. And so there is some there and addiction potential there. But the inflammation that actually occurs with that tends to affect everything, so including the brain. We see worsening of balance problems, peripheral neuropathy. Diabetics tend to get really bad peripheral neuropathy, but also kind of worsening migraines, just not thinking clearly, or brain fog, then kind of just mood swings. So all these things can potentially influence the brain. We just may not be recognizing that this is part of it. So kind of in summary, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Why are you everywhere? But it also is probably not helping you from an overall health perspective, but also then from a weight perspective too. All right, so a few tips then. We talked about gluten-free. Kind of going gluten-free doesn't mean eating quote, gluten-free, because a lot of things that are gluten-free are actually very high carb. So if you're just substituting a non-gluten starch for a gluten starch, you're probably not doing yourself a big favor. Okay? Again, remember the core of your eating plan: hydration, water is the best thing to drink, good protein sources, which from food, the best ones are meat, seafood, cheese, and egg, and then plenty of vegetable salad stuff, which are basically gluten-free. Okay? So when I talk about low carb, that doesn't mean you're not eating any carbohydrate, because vegetable salad stuff, that's carbohydrate. But no one ever comes to me and says, I'm gaining weight because I'm eating too much broccoli or cauliflower or romaine lettuce or asparagus, or those aren't the things. It's all the other stuff we tend to eat. And again, there is no such thing as carbohydrate deficiency, which then also includes there's no such thing as a wheat deficiency. All right, a couple, I mentioned them earlier, kind of the two books. One's called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis, good resource. And the other is Grain Brain by Dr. David Perlmutter. Good resources. That's where a lot of this information came from. All right, if you have questions, I don't see anything popped up at the moment, but if you have questions, just give us a yell here at the Center for Weight Loss Success. Again, the email, success@cfws.com. Phone number 757-873-1880. Hopefully you've been going in, getting your body comp checked. You want to make sure you're losing the fat, keeping the lean body mass. You should be receiving the weight loss tips as well as weekly recipes. You should be checking into the membership portal as well. Tune in each Tuesday, 6 o'clock for the next webinar. Watch your email for the invite and link. And remember, it's your life. Make it a healthy one. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.